Imagine going to court and having no legal knowledge or can't afford representation and you have to fight against paternity. How would you feel about that? We'll discuss this next on Women Against Paternity Fraud. There are very few environments in which one is more at the mercy of others than to be an unrepresented litigant in the American court. No public agency has ever counted or characterized the paternity fraud population, and yet certain facts are well known. Government-initiated paternity establishments arise in the context of welfare payments. The paternity targets pursued by government agencies are overwhelmingly low income and disproportionately drawn from minority communities. One surprising aspect of the paternity fraud problem is that the obligators are not only disproportionately poor and a minority, a significant number are also very young men. The traditional view in the United States is that minors cannot make legally binding contracts. The effort to get the numbers up in paternity establishments, however, has resulted in abrogation of this disability in a number of states. In some states, a minor can sign a binding paternity acknowledgement. Without the consent of his parents, and without the appointment of a guardian ad litem, a 15, 16, or 17-year-old boy, unrepresented by counsel, his parents, or a guardian ad litem, is an easy target for false paternity establishment, either by default judgment or by the uninformed signature of a paternity acknowledgement form. Imagine the defendant enters a government building intended to be intimidating, addresses a judge in a robe on a raised platform, surrounded by a bailiff, clerk, and court reporter, and is opposed by a government-paid lawyer representing the welfare department. How can anyone think that this is a fair situation? For a poorly educated, low-income minority, or any person that has no legal knowledge and can't afford a lawyer, to walk into a courtroom alone? Anybody who has been in a child support court knows that most are run like a factory assembly line. The proposed father, who in most cases hasn't even taken a DNA test, is hustled through the formality, often in less than 5 minutes, and may not even realize what has happened until his paycheck is garnished for child support for a child that might not be his. The state's direct financial incentive is to establish paternity regardless of actual paternity facts. In welfare cases, there's almost always only one attorney in the courtroom, and that attorney is not representing the paternity target. Most paternity fraud cases never result in contested litigation. The low-income, minority, uninformed, and young paternity fraud victims receive their default judgment, or his 5 minutes without counsel, in the assembly line of the child support courtroom and is simply helpless. He cannot afford a lawyer and cannot understand the legal process. He can only attempt to decide how to cope with what has been done to him. Many go underground, many accumulate child support arrearages, many are rounded up and subjected to the full array of penalties, such as losing your driver's license, business license, tax interceptions, and even jailed. What happens to those who return to court and try to fight for their freedom? What reception do they receive? What results do they obtain? Currently, the answers to these questions depend upon where he is, rather than what he did. Some states and some individual courts have strong policies in favor of vacating false paternity establishments. Other states and some individual courts have equally strong policies perpetuating the false paternity establishment. If paternity fraud were a 1 in a million event, we might shrug and say that the random strike of paternity fraud is no worse than the random strike of lightning. The reality is that the lowest estimates of the number of paternity fraud victims are in the tens of thousands, and some believe that the number may be in excess of 1 million. Paternity fraud reform is needed. Can we count on you? Visit our website and become a member. Help us to help paternity fraud victims, because paternity is important to you and to children.